this is me. So my background's in digital agencies most of my career, but for the last 10 years or so, I've been kind of focusing my work on how cities develop, how places change through the action of digital technologies. I'm a co-founder of Sheffield Digital, which is the Association for Digital Industries here in the city. I also I teach at Hallam, topics around digital design. But for the last 3 years, in fact, since about 10 days before the first COVID lockdown, I started working with an organization called Zigurat in Barcelona, which is an online university, essentially. They deliver postgraduate programs accredited by the University of Barcelona. And I was initially asked to do some teaching around smart cities. And then a year later, I took over as the director of the program. So I run the program. We're an international program. I have 20 specialists that teach on the course across the whole curriculum, and about 40 students from all around the world that take the course every year. And it's a smart city management program. So unlike most other smart cities or kind of digital transformation of cities programs that are more about the technologies and the kind of the technology side to city development, our course is about that, but it's also about how leaders manage cities, right? It's the management side of it, how you, either public or private sector, as somebody who's in a position of authority and leadership within a particular geography, what do you need to know in order to make good decisions or to get the right people in the room to make good decisions, and what are those processes like? So, and part of that, a small part of that is around project management, and a small part of that is about Agile. But I'm increasingly interested in how Agile practice can have an impact on lots of other areas of the ways that cities are managed and the way that people are engaged and involved in making decisions about how their cities develop. So that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about. So how can being Agile improve our cities is the provocation, right? This is a provocation to you as much as it was to me in trying to answer this question. There's a couple of things that I'm not going to be talking about. I'm not going to be talking about modular buildings, right? This is a popular topic in urbanism. Does anybody recognize this building? It's a very famous building. Anybody know what this is? It's called Habitat 63. It was built in the 1960s in Montreal. And the idea was, can we build an apartment building in which everybody has a garden rather than a balcony? And people bought apartments, and then they chose where those apartments went. And it's basically this huge higgledy-piggledy arrangement. And it's like one of those desirable places to live in the world now. It's an amazing building, incredible. But I'm not talking about that. Obviously, modular buildings, you won't hear me talking about it. I won't even mention it. Obviously, there's lots of work going on in modular buildings and using containers and moving stuff around and stuff like that. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm also not talking about GovTech, right? Agile practice in public services. Yes, we know it's established. It's like been a big. I'm sure it's a big part of your work. I'm just leaving that in a little box with a bow on it, just like that. Yeah, that's happening. I'm looking at some other things. So I sort of went back to see what people had said about Agile, how many people were applying Agile to cities, and how they were using the term, right? So this is not Agile with a big A, like small a Agile. So what meanings of Agile exist in the urban space currently? And one of the first kind of expressions of this that I found was an article in 2012 that was written by one of the associates at Arup, Steve Lennon, and he talked about the idea that cities needed to become much more agile because the future was so uncertain, because technological change and social change was having such a big impact. We couldn't predict what the requirements of the city and its citizens were going to be, even in the near term, let alone the long term. And so when we're designing infrastructure, which is what Arup do, right? This is not public services. This is like designing roads, designing waste systems, water systems, energy systems, heat networks, chunks of infrastructure in cities. How do we design these chunks of infrastructure in a way that they're flexible into the future? Okay. So think small was one of his concepts. We can kind of see these relationships between concepts that we know from Agile software development. Think small, think in terms of small-scale implementation of infrastructure. So rather than building a massive water treatment plant for a whole city, why not build smaller plants distributed around the city so that if you need more capacity, you can build more of them in the right places. So there's a whole set of concepts around this, around how to design infrastructure so that it's much more flexible, much more modular. And he said in order to do that, we need better data, we need better models, and we need better relationships. And I thought this was really interesting that he focused on relationships because he said at the heart of this is trust. Right? He said strong trust can help us develop urban agility by enabling people to embrace change rather than instinctively oppose it. All right, we'd recognize this. Like this is straight from the Agile handbook, right? Yes, trust. So yeah, this is not Agile, big A Agile, but there's some concepts in here that we can relate to. But they're talking about not building software, but building big chunks of city infrastructure. This is also quite closely related to this other concept around what's called responsive cities. There's a kind of a movement around this that started in the early part of the 2010s. I think the Responsive City, the book came out in 2012. And the responsive city is a city that responds to the needs of its citizens. So it's technologically enabled. It uses, it focuses on data-driven decision-making and citizen engagement, open data and transparency, a whole set of technological components that a city would need in order for it to be much more responsive to its citizens. But at this point in the kind of thinking about this was really to feed into decision-making. Agile is not part of this conception, the responsive city, and really a lot of it was around broadband, really. It was around fiber. We need to fiber up our cities so that we can create the technology infrastructure that we need in order for cities to be truly responsive to their citizens. And then, we have articles like this. This is 2017. Smart cities are boring. Give us responsive cities. So this idea, this is Colin O'Donnell, who's an urban technologist, wrote this. And he's basically frustrated with the way that technology is being used in cities. We're instrumenting our cities up. We're gathering a lot of data. The smart city movement is taking that data and creating insight, but no one's really doing anything with it, right? No one's actually using that data to provide, instant feedback and responsiveness to citizens. So his idea was that, you see, you think, you do. Our cities are increasingly able to see themselves, to measure what's going on in the city. They're increasingly able to think about that, use that data to gain insights, and to draw, conclusions from what they're seeing, what the instruments are telling them. But we're not actuating anything, right? The do part is missing. The city's not responding to what's really happening, and it's certainly not responding in real time, which is what he wants it to. He wants there to be a layer of applications that sit on top of this infrastructure that are able to respond immediately to the needs of citizens, of people, of visitors, of what's going on based on understanding their behavior right now. And this then also leads into this idea of urban operating systems. So there is also this critique within the literature, within smart city study, that actually what technology companies want is they want to cloak our cities in sensor networks and technology, that the measures are every move when we step outside of our doors, that we're being monitored and measured, everything's being cybernetically recorded and evaluated. and the city is taking all that data and making decisions about us without us really being aware of it. And there are, many technology companies that are trying to sell these urban operating systems to city administrations, and there's a very strong critique about this and about how undemocratic it is, how untransparent it is, how nobody really can explain what the value of it is. And we see these in some domains. This is completely non-controversial, right? University of Sheffield, for example, they ran a project called Centaur, which was looking at automatically responding to floodwater, to stormwater. So they have a Internet of Things connected sewage management system, right? A set of technologies, sensors, and control mechanisms that cities can install throughout all of their stormwater management systems, and those systems will respond automatically to weather events, moving water away from areas where it's likely to flood and things like that. And that all happens in real time. There's no human intervention involved. They have an AI that figures out, exactly what's going on in the system and optimizes it for whatever the conditions are, and also predicts what the conditions are likely to be based on the rain forecast. Uncontroversial, right? That's an example of an urban operating system that nobody really cares about. No one really does that. People are concerned about sewage when it ends up in rivers and the sea, obviously, but no one minds that kind of automatic intervention. But this is ultimately, essentially, what prevented Sidewalk Toronto, the big smart city development in Toronto, was pushback from the community about Sidewalk Labs, which is an Alphabet company, sister company of Google, not being able to explain fully how citizen data was going to be handled when it was measured, or actually they couldn't guarantee that it wasn't going to be anonymized at source, because they couldn't guarantee what the procurement arrangements were going to be for the providers of the sensors and things like that. A lot of that critique comes out of this city, actually. The Urban Institute, the University of Sheffield, Professor Simon Marvin, he and another professor at Durham University have kind of written the book on urban operating systems and their critique. This is kind of the cybernetic view of what the city of the future could be like. These kind of things are actively being built in some parts of the world. And some of my students are involved in building them. And so then there was this. So this was a report produced or commissioned by the WEF, the World Economic Forum, that came out in 2018. And it asked a bunch of very eminent urbanists and urban technologists to think about what agile cities would be like in these, I think it's 8 dimensions. So what does it mean for buildings to be agile? What does it mean for land to be agile, for energy, for mobility, for IT, security, education, and governance? So all of these areas of city activity, management, organization. And so I'm not going to look at all of these. But this was the kind of the idea of the report. Cities must harness the opportunities and address the challenges brought about by the fourth industrial revolution. In this sense, agility has to be one of the defining characteristics of cities as they plan their future. These are the dimensions they looked at. Agile IT assets. So they looked at the idea they need to be efficient and responsive to user service delivery needs at a reduced cost or risk. These are the key elements of what agile IT infrastructure is supposed to be like. We'll notice, looking at this, that these are all features of the systems themselves. They're not features of the processes used to make them, right? When we think of agile software development, we're thinking about the processes that are involved in creating software. Of how that software is made and who's involved in making it, and how it's improved over time through iterative redesign. That doesn't figure in this, right? So their report on Agile doesn't really cover what we would consider to be Agile. It just looks at features of the end product, if you like, not the process. Although it does look at governance, and in governance, generally, it does bring some of that process in. So Agile governance, it says, in cities should promote cross-entity and bottom-up innovation. It should formulate policies on disruptive emerging technology, so cities should actually understand what technologies are capable of. It should introduce lean budgeting. Actually, has anybody come across lean budgeting? Is this a common phrase? It wasn't a common phrase to me. But in this context, lean budgeting is taken to mean investing budgets in processes rather than products, or teams instead of projects. So you don't budget for something to be delivered, you budget for a team to build and continually develop something. So out of all of the things that this report proposes, that introduced lean budgeting thing, which is like a tiny bit in the report, I think is actually probably the most important one, and maybe the most transformational. There's more stuff about, it's not me, is it? There's more stuff about PPPs, right, public-private partnerships, and other forms of procuring than there is about lean budgeting. But I think lean budgeting would have a bigger impact on stuff. And support flexible multi-stage procurement that allows for prototyping, encourage customer feedback and engagement during service design. So there's like little hints in this. But yeah, the rest of the report is like, the buildings are supposed to be responsive to our activities, right? They're supposed to, like, the ventilation and the heating are supposed to respond based on the occupancy of the building. It's very kind of automated kind of set of instrumental responses, not agility in terms of management agility and how you change things, how you adapt, and how you take into account new contexts and new situations. So that's sort of where things have got to in terms of looking at agility in cities in general terms. But then sort of underneath all of this, there is also this big movement, the Open and Agile Smart Cities organization. This is an organization that was founded in 2015. It's a non-profit international organization based out of Luxembourg, I think. It has chapters in 33 countries. They do training courses. They do a big annual summit. And they run a whole bunch of projects. And their mission is to create sustainable impact for our member cities by working towards a common technical ground for cities and communities based on open standards, open APIs, and shared data models. So they are trying to build the standards, the technology standards for all cities to build technology components with and standards to, right? And the key principle in this is what they call minimum interoperability mechanisms, MIMs. So I was going to ask again, is this a common? Do people know MIMs? Is MIMs a thing that you guys are all aware of, that is in common parlance? No, I think they've made it up. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But this idea of minimum interoperability mechanisms is really interesting. So they're basically saying MIMs are the minimum but sufficient capabilities needed to achieve interoperability of data systems and services between buyers, suppliers, and regulators across governance levels around the world. So they are trying to build a set of technology standards that do the minimum necessary for you to build useful stuff so that they can much more easily be interconnected with each other and connect to other services that use them and run on top of them. For two reasons. So that they can be flexible, right? So that you can adapt and build things that you need to for your community or your city and your context. But also so that you can actually have an international marketplace for this stuff, so that what you build for one city in one place will also work in another city with minimum adaptation if they also adopt the kind of the MIMS standards. So those are the challenges that they're looking to address with this MIMS concept. And this is the state of play. They literally just had their 2023 annual conference. I haven't seen the papers from it yet. So this was the state of play at the end of the conference last year. So they have 10 MIMs. They have 10 standards that cover each of these 10 different areas. Context, data models, ecosystem, personal data, fair AI, security, spaces, indicators, analytics, resources. I'm not going to go through and explain. You can go and have a look at their website and find out what these things are. But these ones are well established, okay? So there are many implementations of this MIM actually running in cities right now. Same with data models. Ecosystems the standard is at version 1.0, and there are some implementations being done. As it sort of gets around, I think these ones have just been proposed, so work hasn't started yet on these ones. Specifications for part 1 of spaces have been agreed. So there's this whole process going on to create the technology infrastructure for cities to be more agile with the way that they develop services and solutions and the way that they procure them. And they have a reference architecture. I'm not going to go into that. But for those that are interested, like, ooh, it's a reference architecture. So what conclusions can we draw from all of this? All these different views of how Agile connects with cities. So here's a few things that sort of struck me. Tell me if these are bollocks, or add them. Tell me what about this, what about that. But Agile software development is now fairly established in local authority digital transformation and GovTech in the developed world. I think we can kind of say that. That's why I'm not really talking about that. That's ticking on nicely. There's a global movement trying to create the technical standards that enable Agile software development and management. Okay, that's what Open and Agile Smart Cities is about. They're trying to create this technical standards to enable this. But they probably need more awareness, right? But these things are necessary but not sufficient for creating truly responsive cities. So that concept of cities being responsive, we need a lot more than just those two things. There are certainly city domains where Agile is not an appropriate approach, right? Like in that report that we saw from the WEF, like our capital A Agile approaches to some of those things that are in that report just don't make any sense. And the word Agile probably shouldn't be used because it's confusing in that context. But I think there are a lot more domains that are appropriate than only digital public services. But those ones that are, the cadences might be very different to what we're used to, right? They might be much more longer term. We might not be talking about a sprint every 2 weeks. We might be talking about a sprint every 5 years. It's a different cadence. There are different sort of scales at which some of this infrastructure needs to be developed. But there's also this techno-utopian vision of agile cities in which decisions are largely automated and responses are done in real time. At the same time, there's a fundamental conflict between the competing needs for citizen inclusion in decision-making and rapid responsive decision-making, right? These things are kind of in conflict with each other. So how do you run an agile process on things at the scale where you need involvement in decision-making from citizens, but you also have a requirement to make decisions quickly because you have to follow, you have to stay within the cadence, the agile cadence that you're specifying. There's still a lack of leadership knowledge of both of what Agile, capital A Agile is, and the difference between it and organizational agility. I don't think leaders know this very much at all. So as far as I can tell, there's no fleshed out framework for Agile management practice that is specific to cities or to place-based projects. All right? Agile's talked about a lot, much more than I've given you. I've picked out the resources that I think are interesting or like get to something that's useful. But Agile is mentioned much more than this. But might it be worth creating one? What would such a framework look like? I'm really interested to see whether that would be possible. So yeah, that's where I've got to. As I said, this is just a sketch of where my thinking is at from looking at this for a little bit. But I wanted to finish by kind of showing some examples of where cities are agile, right? Even if they don't use capital A agile methods and practices, there are some great examples of how agile some cities can be. There's some famous old examples like Austin. Austin, Texas has this very famous innovation culture. They have in fact, their equivalent of the local chamber, right? The business organization coined this slogan, "Keep Austin Weird," which is kind of stuck. And it speaks to this permission that people have in all kind of organizations in Austin to try things new, to work together, to do stuff that's interesting. You won't get shot down for a stupid idea. There's no idea that is too ridiculous. People are actively trying to kind of do stuff that's just daft and weird and strange. But I remember talking to two of the guys that worked for Austin City Council about 10 years ago, and they were talking about the framework that they built for this activity within the city. And they said that what you need is not a few flagship projects, but you need thousands of projects, done by small groups of local people in conjunction with those that have power in the city, in order to make a real difference. And the one little thing that I remember is that if you phone, well, I don't remember quite a lot of it, but the thing that sticks in my head is if a citizen phones the council, their customer support phone line, instead of getting a hold message, you get local bands, right? They have a playlist of music from local bands that they change every month, and it's curated by a local radio station. And they, instead of procuring some external, telephony system to provide a hold thing with "you are so far in the queue," they just play local bands to promote them, right? And it's that kind of joined upness that cities are capable of doing if they have the right kind of culture and incentives. And the other example I wanted to talk about is much more recent, and it's here in the UK. This is Shoreland's bike bus in Glasgow. Glasgow invested quite a lot of money in their cycling infrastructure, and one of the things that they did was they started this scheme where schools could, instead of parents driving their kids to school, they would pay teachers to cycle around and pick the kids up, and they'd all join the bus, and they'd all cycle into school. And so you can see how many kids are part of the bus, the bike bus. But what happened was, Shoreland's the cycle infrastructure is there. It's not always segregated, and it goes over quite a large junction, right? Road junction. And the bus got so long that kids were getting cut off, right? So the lights would change, and the kids at the back would get cut off from the kids at the front, and it was dangerous. Because there's teachers at the front, teachers at the back, but the kids had to actually stop, and some of them are very young. So they raised this to the council, and the council have implemented a scheme or a technology whereby these guys at the front have got a little button on their handlebars, and when they hit the button, the lights will change to green for 45 seconds to allow all of the kids through. Right? They're able to just change the way their whole traffic system works, and give these kids the same priority access to the traffic light system that they built for COP26. Was it COP26 or 27? 27 last year. They hosted COP, and part of the requirements for that were to allow dignitaries to get through the city without stopping for security reasons. So they had to upgrade their traffic system to allow those convoys to have buttons to green light all of the traffic lights through the city. And so they've repurposed that technology to allow the same thing for kids getting to school by bicycle. So as an example of what cities can do and how agile they can be without being capital A agile, I think it's a great example. So yeah. Questions, feedback, tell me I'm an idiot, whatever you want. Thank you very much.